Hey everyone, my name's Alex, and thanks for checking out my series on writing a simple hip-hop instrumental. In this segment, I'll be discussing how to write chord progressions for our hip-hop instrumental example. Please keep in mind that in this video, I'll begin assuming you've watched my first tutorial on setting up a Logic Pro session and have also learned the basics on how to write a simple hip-hop drum beat. If you haven't watched those tutorials and would like to start from the beginning of the series, check out my YouTube page for a list of all my tutorial videos. I'd like to begin this video by saying that hip-hop music contains a giant variety of chord progressions and harmonic content. If you're an avid listener of hip-hop music like I am, I'm sure you've heard hip-hop beats that incorporate chord progressions throughout the beat, or possibly more sample-based hip-hop that focuses more on the beat and not necessarily the harmonic content. Either way, understanding how to write and experiment with chord progressions in your music is a great way to go about writing your own instrumentals and ultimately developing your own style over time. If you'd like to read a more in-depth article discussing chord progressions, please check out my blog section on my website. I posted the link to the site below the video in this description. Now, let's look at our example session in Logic, and I'll explain the process I use to find catchy and accessible chord progressions when I write my own instrumentals. For this tutorial, I've created a simple chord progression that I found works really well with the flow of this beat. For the purpose of this video, I've kept the progression relatively simple, but always remember that when you're writing your own music, the world of harmony is at your disposal. You can make your progressions as simple or complex as you see it. That's part of the beauty of hip-hop music. As long as you can dig what you've produced, chances are others will too. To begin writing this progression, I'm going to need to create a new software instrument track, just as I did with the drum tracks. After creating a new track, go ahead and relabel it with the word chords. Move on over to the tracking area and create a new MIDI region and extend it to fit within our 4-bar loop. The next step is to choose an instrument to write our progression for. In this example, I've gone over to the Media tab and selected from the Electric Piano tab from the Acoustic Piano section in the library. I typically like to write my chord progressions on some type of simple keyboard instrument because they allow me to hear the voicing of my chords clearly. Now, go ahead and move back to the tracking area and double-click on your new MIDI region. Now that our MIDI editor is opened, use the command-click tool I mentioned in my previous tutorial videos and begin by writing a note starting on the C3 note on the keyboard. Now, this part may sound kind of silly, but it's quite honestly the best way I've found to experiment and come up with usable chord progressions for my beats. I like to begin with a note lasting 1 bar, like the one I've written here on C3. Then, I begin stacking notes on top of each other. Once I find a chord that I like, I move on to the next bar of my loop and create another chord. I then play back the 2 chords until I have something I find pleasing. I repeat this process until I have a progression that is satisfying to me and works well for my beat. I've already created a chord progression for this example, but before I play it back to you, I want to point out that each chord has 4 notes and lasts 1 bar each. This is a great way as a beginner to figure out cool chord progressions for your instrumentals. Let's listen to what I've written now. Writing solid chord progressions is something that did not come naturally to me. It took a lot of practice and experimentation for me to become comfortable with sticking with a particular progression. My advice here would be to listen to your favorite hip-hop artists or producers and try to emulate what they've created in their own instrumentals. A great way to improve in this area of songwriting is copying what others have done and begin incorporating their songwriting styles into your own. Now that our chord progression is complete, the next thing we're going to look at is writing a bass line. The bass line in hip-hop varies from genre to genre. Some use a more staggered, simple bass line that pops in and out with the rest of the groove. Others use a more straightforward bass line that accompanies the rest of the instrumental. For this example, I'll be creating a simple bass line so you can understand how I go about making them and solidifying them in my beat. First, create a new instrument track. Then go over to the Media tab and find the preset library. For this example, I'll be using the Basement Bass preset found in the Synth Bass tab. Once you have your bass selected, create an empty MIDI region within the 4-bar loop. Now, an easy way to determine what a solid bass line that would work well with your chord progression is to open up your chord track and copy the bottom notes from each chord by highlighting them and then hitting Command-C to copy. Once you've done that, open up your MIDI editor for your bass track and slide the placement marker to the beginning of the bar. hit Command V to paste the MIDI notes from the chord progression. Slide them down to the lower register to fit the range of the bass, and you should now have a complementary bass line for your instrumental. If we take a look at the bass line I've constructed for this example, I've simply moved the bass notes I've already produced around so that I have something a little more harmonically interesting. Feel free to move your MIDI tiles around until you found something that you like. Bass lines can make or break a hip-hop beat. Just like the drum tracks, the bass line acts as part of the foundation of the beat. Without one, the beat would feel empty and lacking those lower frequencies that hip-hop music has come to be associated with. Remember to try and experiment with not only the actual notes of the bass line, but also the rhythm. This will add even more harmonic texture to your beat and make it even more memorable to your listeners. Check out the blog section on my website. I provided a link located in the description beneath this video. I posted some examples of great bass lines that do an amazing job of supporting the chord progression in some of my favorite beats. We now have a functioning chord progression and bass line that work well together within our instrumental. The next thing to look at is the melody. The melody, or also referred to as the hook in hip-hop and pop genres, is essentially the catchy section of music that makes the instrumental memorable. Think about some of your favorite songs, and the first thing you'll most likely remember is the melody. I usually just pick an instrument that sticks out above and over my chord progression and bass line. For this example, I've chosen a synthesizer preset that I felt molded well with the rest of the beat. Create a new instrument track, label it Hook, and once you head over to the Media tab and find the Library section, locate the Synthesizer tab and select the first option that reads Synth Leads. I've chosen to use the classic trance synth preset because it cuts through my chord progression and adds a lot of nice textures to my instrumental. Logic's preset synthesizers offer some great options, so be sure to check them all out when you're looking for an instrument that will allow your hook to stick out. Now that I have my instrument selected, create a new MIDI region track for your hook track. Take a listen to the hook I've already created for my instrumental. Unless you have a background in music training, the easiest way to create a catchy hook is to simply write out some notes in the MIDI editor and listen back to what you've created. Continue to tinker with the length of the notes and the placement of them until you're satisfied with the hook. The important thing to remember is 1. Not overcomplicate the melody, and 2. Make sure the notes in your hook go well with your chord progression. In the example hook I've created here, I've used some simple eighth notes and a reoccurring set of notes that go well with my progression. I tried not to make it too in your face, however, because you don't want to let the hook become the center of attention in your instrumental. If you plan on having an MC or vocalist rap or sing over your beat, you definitely don't want your hook to be busy and that it covers up the vocals in your beat. Oftentimes, simple is better. Now that we have all the elements of our track created, the last thing I'm going to do is create one last track for the chorus portion of our instrumental. Create another instrument track and locate the 80s Jump Brass preset under the Synth Brass tab in the preset library. Then, copy and paste the original chord progression MIDI region. Slide the time marker over to the beginning of the loop and paste. Make sure to have the brass tab selected before you paste. Now we have 2 chord progression layers we can use for both the verse and the chorus of our instrumental. That's all for this video. In my next and final installment in the series, I'll be discussing song structure and how we can add some variation throughout our instrumental to keep the listener interested. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all soon.